All right, welcome back to episode 8 of Conversations from the Underground. My name is Eric Salas. We got Bradley Bougerity here with us, and you know how we do. We're just gonna go ahead and jump right on into the situation for the first 5 minutes. We're just gonna catch up, break bread, and then after that, we're gonna see where the conversation takes us. All right. So what's up, Brad? What you
Oh
got
man.
going on? Hey, you know what? As a matter of fact, tell me more about like what you have working on right now. What you've been writing.
Oh, I'm trying to finish up. Man, I'm just having a hard time finding time to work on this manuscript. I'm messing around with a book project for this edible series of books that has a bunch of different like volumes of things that people eat or drink. I've been writing one for cannabis that's due in August, and it's just hard to be able to sit down and spend a lot of time, man. Something will happen, I'll do something, and then it'll be sitting here forever. And then I always end up with maybe a paragraph or so. That's
Damn.
just chipping away way pretty slowly. But I mean, I still got until August, so we'll see. I'm hoping in the middle of this break, that we get when the semester's over, is going to be a real good determinant on how difficult life will be in the spring for me, because I'm gonna try to grind real hard over this break. I know it's going pretty hard lately. Towards the end of the semester, I'm kind of like in your boat, where I got exams that are still about to come up that are due actually tonight. You know what I mean? That I'll have to grade before finals. And then I had this guest speaker, this vegan lady,
Mm.
show up and give a really nice presentation last week for my classes, which kind of put me back a little bit. It was worth it, but I got to rush and do some things tomorrow, so that we can get to at least the end of the civil rights movement. But yeah, man, that's how it is. Me, busy, busy, busy.
Mhm. Yeah. So how was that presentation? What was that lady's name? She was speaking on veganism.
Yeah, her name's Sarah Farb. I think it's Farb. Um, Man, I wish Nilly is her name. She works for us. I wish I'd have known this a lot earlier. It's funny because I still don't even really know what Nilly does. I mean, she's cool. I like
She
her.
is cool.
Friend, I would consider more so than a colleague. You know what I mean? Because we don't have any. Like, I'm a historian. She's in the sciences and
Right.
like chemistry. I think she has a
Chemistry.
PhD in chemistry, but she doesn't teach.
Mhm.
Like she probably just
Like
sits in the lab all day, does research or something at a community college.
I when she sent us an email, I saw like you see their signature and whatnot, and it kind of tells you like their position. And she's like she works in a lab, like she's a tech, but she has a PhD in chemistry.
Yeah, man, she
Like,
knows her stuff really well,
gotta be
especially when it
right.
comes to diet. Uh, and she's also into the moral issue of veganism, but she invited uh me to allow Sarah to come into the class, and Sarah's doing this tour, like this vegan van tour. She's living in her van and she's going to whatever areas of people will allow her to present uh, on this um reasons that she has for why it's important to be a vegan if you care about the environment and your health. Uh, so it was interesting. It was interesting, man. It really was. I mean, I dabbled in a lot of that stuff in undergraduate school when I took an ethics class in philosophy, um, and called myself a vegan for a little while. Then it went into a vegetarian, and then it went into I'm traveling overseas and I can't. Uh, Refuse food from people while I'm in their culture. It's kind of
Mm.
disrespectful. So I never really went back after I came back from Russia that one time. But I always kind of was like, I'll try to avoid buying it and stuff like this. But listening to her kind of really got me thinking about it a lot more. I thought she did a really good job. I like the way she presented it, man, because you hear a lot of these vegan activists. People tend to dismiss them as being very fringe or radical or
Mm.
so opposite of a social norm that they don't even want to listen to them. Uh, but she presents her arguments and information very well. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that they might get a bad rap at times for being a bit I don't know. I was gonna say imposing, with their views and how they carry themselves. There's a, well, you need to carry yourself this way too. Um, and so it didn't come off that way.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I thought she did a good job. She did my early morning and then my afternoon class. And in the afternoon class, one of the students stayed after, turned out to be over an hour after class talking. And Nilly was there and I was there, and then that student left. And for almost another hour, I stayed right there talking before we left, you know. And then the night before, we had the historical underground meeting, and after that, I was with a student for a long time afterwards, you know. And a couple of these little bitty things, man, where you add an hour or two into the mix of your schedule, really speeds up everything else that week, man. And for me, drives me a little bit behind in the writing process, but you gain a lot of insight, you know. Keeps everything young and powerful. So I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, that's cool because it sounds to me like, you know, with those two interactions, even though they might have only been about an hour away from your you know, your normal schedule or your normal routine, those 2 hours, it seems to me, it kind of like kick-started or reinvigorated some things for you. You know, if it's like, so are you entertaining doing the veganism thing again? Or are you,
I
like, to
am.
what degree? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna kind of slowly wing into it because, you know,
Now,
I take one of the things that she hit me with was I take this heart medicine. What do they call it? Cholesterol medicine.
mm,
And the doctor I need to ask the doctor I got now, because, you know, I just started going to the doctor about a few years after I got this medicine or this insurance on a regular basis. But I switched doctors. I need to ask her. But the doctor before I switched told me that only 15% of your cholesterol levels is based off your diet. About 85% of the rest is genetic. And she just straight up said that's bullshit. And so I want to try this whole thing where I'm gonna finish up this medicine, get my blood work done, and then I'm gonna get off the medicine and try to completely change my diet for about 6 7 months, and then go back get the blood test again to see what it really looks like. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Kind of experiment on myself to kind of see just how well a vegan diet will uh, help improve your cholesterol levels. I mean,
Now,
because
what all does that mean though? Like, so like, what does it mean for you to go on a vegan diet? Like, what would that consist of? So that means no fish, no
yeah, so
egg.
for her, there's different versions, but for her, a full plant-based diet completely for
Okay.
moral issues which come before the diet issues. So diet issues is kind of like a plus, really, and environmental improvement is also a plus, really. That also comes from the number one, which would be moral issues. She would argue. So she doesn't use any plants. I took her out there, or I mean, any fish. No, I'm sorry, she used all plants. Any animals, anything that you're exploiting, taking from an animal just for the sake of your own benefit at the expense of the animal. That's the key right there. So I debated with her a lot about my chickens in the backyard. Like, I'm taking care of my chickens. They're giving me eggs. I'm not exploiting them. But she was like, you may be doing that, but what about the rest of the people who just get rid of the chicken instantly when it doesn't give you any more eggs, or where you buy them from? There are these huge, really problematic industries that kind of like torture the animals, really, right? And so she does it out of this idea that she called it speciesism, is what she called it, speciesism, which is this arbitrary belief that our species is more valuable than the others and gives us the right to treat them however we want.
Do you think that comes with an elevated sense of um, understanding, like an understanding, an elevated sense of consciousness?
Yeah, explain that a little bit.
Well, I mean, the fact that, so she said that speciesism, that our species is better, elevated, more advanced than others. I mean, she's not lying. We are. more elevated, at least not in the physical sense. There are many animals out there that are physically bigger than us, stronger than us, faster than us, longer than us, shorter than us, whatever. But no species out there has the mental capacity that the human species does to do things like, utilize instruments. Now, we've seen some species out there that have been utilizing instruments to do this or to do that, maybe to feed themselves or to, round up things, but nothing to the capacity or the exponential advancement that humans have. We're in nature not built to go 60 miles an hour, but if I get in my car, I can. Where's her speciesism then?
So
There is truth to the fact that our species is elevated. And because of our elevated species, we tend to believe ourselves to be better than other species. Now, I'm not saying that we should exploit other species simply because you're better. You can be better than something, but not take advantage of something because of that, unless that's her argument.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because the student who stayed after, and we continued that conversation, he was talking about the religious holidays that he practices as a Muslim and how important it is. And we are different than animals. And she kept saying, I never, where did I ever say that we weren't different? I never said that. I agree 100% with what you say. The key is whether or not we think it's right to deprive something of life that would otherwise want to live.
Mm-hmm. Now, can I ask you this question? Did she explain as to why other animals do the same? They deprive other animals of the right to live in order to survive.
Yeah, certainly. They don't have that elevated consciousness that you described, which in fact goes exactly into her argument, which is, and she pulls this up by arguing that all of these prophets, if they were coming in here today, they would tell you to be a vegan because of that. Go back and listen to what she said about, does superiority give one the right to deprive something of a life that would otherwise want to live? Do you have the right to deprive something of a life in a torturous manner where it otherwise would want to live if you could get your sustenance without having to do that and pretty much end 90% of all climate change that's leading us towards, which she says, and improve your diet tremendously. And so you would increase everything on the world. Not only that, but you'd increase hunger. Like, look at this. She said we spend 150 billion animals we have to feed every single day, overfeed to make them fat as hell so we can eat them. And we can't feed 8 billion human beings. Why is that the case? 45% of all of our arable farmland, she says, that could be used to grow food for people is used to grow food that we raise and over fatten and abuse tremendously for our own pleasure is really what it boils down to. You have to say it's pleasure, right? And it was interesting because she showed this picture of like this guy about to hit a dog. And she's like, if you're walking down the street and you saw a guy beating up this dog and he was laughing about it and he enjoyed it, you would kind of feel like that was wrong, right? Like you're getting pleasure out of beating up an animal. Even though you're maybe superior than that animal, we feel that that's wrong. But really, she argues that the only reason you have to eat meat is because it's pleasurable for you. Really, that's the only argument one can make now, given the world we live in and the direction our world is going. It's actually significantly immoral to continue to eat meat. But I'm not here to tell you what to do, she said. I just want to give you the information. It was interesting because I responded by saying, like, what if everybody stopped eating chickens today? Actually, chickens are domesticated animal. They can't even live in the wild. So they're all just going to be like slaughtered by this. What's going to happen? And I made that argument for a while and for in my life. And it was interesting how she framed it, like, sort of like, I'm not saying everyone's going to stop doing this at once, but what research shows is that it takes about 10 to 14% of a population to begin to advocate in a moral stance to really start shifting a direction of a society. And it hit me when she said that because, what percentage of the population was Black during the civil rights movement?
Yeah.
right?
Dude,
Very interesting.
dude.
And very interesting, dog. And this started hitting me. I had a conversation with my pops that ended up being a couple hours long when it should have just been like grab something and go.
Right.
about like certain kinds of people. We're encountering these people in my world history class right now with people like E.D. Morel and Roger Casement, who exposed what was going on in the Congo while everybody else kept looking in the direction and letting it go. We're encountering it with Jesus or Muhammad or all these other prophetic people who did something so drastically against the society and got persecuted for it. If they went down as a martyr, sometimes today we look at them as venerated. Sometimes if we don't, if they just die, I think there's a lot of regular people who do the same things that these people do, but they're dismissed in society as outward, whacked out, not,
Crazy.
you know, the overly radical. But there's some sort of like, um, I don't know. It's interesting to think about what is it that makes some people attach to some movement or some moral. They see such moral clarity in something and they pursue it with all costs when all the rest of society just pretends like things are all going well or normal. That she mentioned that term normalized violence, which was very profound as well.
Right. I think it sounds that it's interesting you bring up how society sounds blind to the moral violence. Yet many of the individuals that would operate in the vein or on the path at which she's articulating would also be, they have a tunnel vision as well. Like they have blinders on as well, to where it seems like all they only see is the violence or is the torture or is the exploitation. That's all they see. And at times they come across as zealots and especially vegans. You always hear like, how do you know someone's vegan? Well, in the first 7 minutes of talking, you'll hear this statement or that statement. There's a lot of those, jokes that tend to poke fun at these individuals because they're definitely championing a particular cause. It's interesting that you brought up the civil rights movement and how, she mentioned this relative 10 to 15% that the African American community has, for the most part, been about 14 to 15% of the population since, being in the colonies and then eventually the states. And during that time, you're going to have individuals like William Lloyd Garrison, abolitionists, transcendentalists, utilize what they refer to as moral suasion.
Or John Brown, who took it to a whole nother level, right?
Well, okay, now he's different. We don't, hold on. We won't, let's hold off on him because I think he is, so we can put things on a spectrum.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, this is what we have to do.
But it's about that moral code, right? And that one direction, no matter what, this has to be done because there's a moral degradation in the society that can't be fixed without it.
Right. And so, okay, so yes, and we can make an argument that John Brown was, he was the epitome of a zealot, blind to the action he was committing. I have my students read John Brown's last speech as a primary source.
Nice.
And he's in the courtroom testifying. He's like, I didn't mean to cause any violence. You caused violence. I just wanted to free slaves with weapons. That's all. He's in the courtroom saying this.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Like if you're reading his words, you're like, no, you had every means of committing a violent act. You're going to an arsenal where soldiers exist. You're bringing weapons. You want to steal weapons, and then you want to arm a population. And so, like in the technical sense, he's committing a crime and he's engaging in violent acts. Because he sincerely believes that this is the only way to solve this problem.
Yeah, I agree. And we do need to put a little caveat here in the fact that John Brown was going insane during all that trial, like quite literally. In fact, it's interesting how scholars have looked at this as one of the first sort of insanity plea arguments for the transition to the idea of pleading insanity. They had tortured him so badly that they literally had to wheel him out on his hospital bed, strapped down, to give him his last will and testament before they executed the man, right? And over the course of the trial, he started saying things that were maybe a bit disjointed. But I do think there's a really good correlation to make there about, well, look what the American revolutionaries did, who picked up the guns and tried to gain their independence. What am I doing that's any different than that?
They're definitely. I forget the young lady's name, the one who spoke at your class.
Sarah Farr. She's the vegan van. She called herself the vegan van lady.
The vegan van lady?
Living in a van and going from place to place. She's got no electricity. I guess electricity, but she got no refrigeration. And she says she cooks so cheap. It's a myth that it's so expensive every day, and it's delicious. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway.
I think we can look at a lot of movements, a lot of historical movements where you have to have that. I don't want to call them a fringe element of the revolution. So, for example, like for the abolitionist movement, you have this spectrum of abolitionists, and no one abolitionist is the same. You had abolitionists that only spoke. You had some abolitionists that wrote. You have some abolitionists that would argue only in the pulpit, in church. And then you had some abolitionists that were like, no, we have to take up arms, and I might have to kill a motherfucker, like John Brown. And so you look at a lot of these crusades, if you will, for various causes, and there are sectors. And in this veganism movement, I'd imagine there are some that are like, well, this is just something that I choose for myself. I don't even bring it up to enforce it upon you. You can just see how I act, or you can see how I am living my life, and then that might be the influence. Whereas then another one's like, how dare you even bring food to this table? Or I'm sorry, how dare you bring meat to this table? Or why would you even bring that up? So it's, and then it becomes
or they throw red paint on somebody's fur coat, like wow.
Yeah, man. So I believe I believe every successful movement. I think I agree with this young lady. I think almost every successful movement must require that, and I don't want to say she's a zealot, but a zealous group of individuals that are guided by that moral suasion to add to that spectrum. And I can almost, you look at this pro-choice movement. We can look at a pro-choice movement, and I'm pretty sure there's a man who said, no, I did need to blow up that abortion clinic. I needed to, because those babies can't defend themselves. The same way that John Brown might say, no, I needed to go and steal those weapons, because those slaves, they needed to defend themselves and free themselves, and that's all I was trying to do. I didn't mean to cause any harm here,
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting. It's a fine line. I don't know how fine a line it is or not, actually. I think it's more a byproduct of your lived experiences and the nuanced aspects of your identity that ultimately leads you down one path that will manifest itself into something as extreme or moderate or something that so a lot of people act extreme, and then when the cameras ain't on, they eating everything because nobody knows about it. Other people, there's so many different variations of types of people in a particular movement, because it's like you got this identity, or you got this thing, you got this moral moment of clarity, like Morel had when he saw all of this ivory and palm oil and all these riches going out of Congo, and ain't nothing but guns coming in. And he had all his money on the line, his job on the line, millions of people going through their daily lives, seeing all this brutality, nobody's saying anything. He come out and he say it. There's something, the whole cumulative lived experiences before that moment occurred, that this person endured and developed over the course of their life all go into those decisions and the actions that you take, I think.
For sure.
And that's one of the reasons, like, we're so compulsively trying to like pinpoint the problem in psychology. Like, we know this is the crux, or this is the problem, or this, we're trying to isolate everything from all the other things, which can't be done when it comes to these things about identity. Like, we had this conversation, I think, when we were talking about John Brown in my class the other day, with about, one of the students asked, what makes some people like this? Is it their nature, or is it their nurture more? And we got into this concept about, well, that's a false dichotomy. Like, our society tries to make us think it's this either or thing, when in reality it's like this symbiotic relationship between the two that are constantly pulling and tugging each other, so much so that you can't possibly take out an element of one without completely shifting the whole direction of the other. So they're not these two separate things. They're constantly intertwined.
Could the same be said for your cholesterol not necessarily being because of diet or genetics, but as you just mentioned, this symbiotic relationship where this convergence of two, as opposed to simply, well, it's got to be my diet, or it's got to be my genetics. Is it possible that it's, as you just mentioned, this dichotomy?
Absolutely. And the way I think about it, how much it's on my mind, how much you think positive thoughts. I mean, there's so much other stuff that goes into it, right? And which is going to be interesting to see how this whole experiment works, if I can push through it. But even the fact that I just said, if I can push through it, kind of shows, the type of thoughts that keep you struggling and determine how successful you end up being. That's why you got to.
You know what it is? Bacon is good.
Right.
Pork chops is good.
Right.
Like that scene from Pulp Fiction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Royale with cheese.
A sewer rat may taste like pumpkin pie.
Right.
And I think a lot of Americans eat chicken, and again, not because this, because I want to punch it in its face. I mean, no, it's because it's accessible to a degree. It's this meat canvas that you can, depending on what sauce you put to it, it changes everything.
The way, like you said, not because they want to punch it in the face. Really, what this is how normalized violence works. In the same way that in the Nazi death camps, Germans on the street just walked by and convinced themselves that there was nothing bad going on. So many Germans had this sense of cognitive dissonance. The way propaganda works in a society, when it's that prevalent and that vested, when the industry is so many people are vested in this industry of exploitation, that they're making so much more money, and they can use that money to utilize as a propaganda tool to convince more people to follow the sheep, to keep sort of thinking in line and pretending like that's not a death camp that's right over there, that I'm not punching that thing in the face when I eat this chicken with all the different varieties. Let me focus on this taste and that taste and all this other wonderful illusion here, while I'm not paying attention to what really amounts to a brutal system of torture, that if the God that you followed were to wake up today, would likely not embrace this any more than they would any other moral problem that we're facing. In fact, it would be more difficult because it's killing the earth, she says.
Right. But only humans have this dilemma.
Right. Which is why these dilemmas, with great dilemmas comes great responsibility. Or else blow that mug up. It's interesting.
Hey man, I think when somebody told me, like, when you pull broccoli, when you tear broccoli from the root, it screams or something like that. I'm not sure. Somebody said something like that.
That's funny.
I'm not sure if it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, broccoli screams when you pull it
Yeah, broccoli ain't gonna scream. It's gonna be good. Um, that's why I hit her with the worms. Like when I took her over there to see my aquaponics system, I was like, so "What do you think about these fish? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Am I abusing these fish? I'm growing plants with their shit. I'm feeding them. I'm taking care of them. If I wouldn't have got them, somebody else would have done this, that." And she's like, "I get all that, but are you really giving them enough space? If you are, good. If you've done the research to figure that out, and that's not causing them trauma or pain, no problem at all. But there's a lot more that you don't pay attention to. So let's just agree, as long as you know you're not hurting them, it'd be good. But where are you buying them from? Look at what PetSmart, look at what the structures, look at how much torture and pain they put these animals through to get them to you. If you really want to do this, then go to a fish sanctuary. They got them all over the place. I'm like, dang, fish sanctuary?
Mhm.
Shit, the same thing wouldn't be about my chickens. Go get your chickens from a sanctuary and all these other types of things, right? And then I asked her about these worms that I raised too. And she was like, I don't know. I haven't checked into the worms. This doesn't sound like it's a problem because they're not, you know, they're not suffering for your pleasure. That's the
Mhm.
key. Um, is this
I wonder.
concept for the
Yeah,
pleasure?
I wonder what you would imagine. What would you imagine? I'm not going to ask you to put words in her mouth or anything, but what her take would be on pet ownership.
Oh yeah, dude, we're having them conversations over there, and Nilly even hit me. It was funny, dog. Uh, Language matters, she said. And when I was talking about my pet, she was like, "We like to refer to them as our companions."
Mhm.
Yo, it was like,
Oh yeah, but that may be true, but there's no, and if that's the case, like if you want to flower up your language, I don't like to refer to it as a meat packing factory. I refer to it as a facility. Like
yeah,
we can do
but
whatever we want.
you're
But
still
if
using it
she
like
has,
that yeah, but you're still using it like that meat factory. What she says is, I refer to them as my companion because I treat them differently. By calling them pets, what you're doing is you're asserting your domination over them for your purposes. And what we try to do as anti-speciesists is to treat other species with respect and compassion. Um,
these
and
non-consensual companions, right?
yeah, I guess.
Oh, I guess. Hey,
Consensual.
I can go online and find me a non-consensual companion too, if you want to get at it like that. And yes,
Right.
I will politely, you know, suggest this or that, but then the animal, the pet, no, I'm sorry, the companions, these animal companions, they can't, they're not going to be able to consent as to how they live, where they live, and in what conditions.
True. Absolutely.
They
I
don't.
agree.
The companion, the companion, the animal companion doesn't get to dictate whether or not if they want to go on that trip with you to in that van. No, you kidnapped that pet and brought him in that van, and now he has to eat shrubbery because of the decision you made. He may
No,
want.
I think Nilly would agree with all of that, and she would say this is why I go to a shelter where an animal's about to be murdered, or a an organization that rescues these animals that are about to be murdered, and then I go there and I get it, and I try to give it its most comfortable life as possible. I give it as much space as it can, and I try to help it live. And so, yeah, to some extent, you still have this capacity over it, but you're minimizing, like you're not locking it in a cage because you get to go and do all this other stuff for your own benefit, or smacking him across the head when he whines because he wants you to pet him, or uh, you know,
Well, yeah,
stuff like
and that's
that.
why I felt like if her name is Sarah and
Sarah, yeah,
Sarah
Sarah
I,
Farb.
Barb, I felt like in based on just what you told me, she kind of glossed over um, you know, your ability to house chickens in a, free capacity, a range type capacity, and only for if they produce, they produce. It's not
Yeah,
like you're force feeding it to produce. And would that be okay? And it seems like that wasn't really addressed clearly
it
because
was.
I,
It was me and her on a personal level, or afterwards in the conversation afterwards, and I think maybe to some extent in the first lecture she gave it twice. Uh, but I asked those questions, and she seemed to say, if everything you're saying is true, and you are taking care of the chickens, and they're producing these eggs for you, and you're not discarding their lives once they are no longer of value to you, and you're still taking care of them, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. She said it wouldn't be an issue. However, most people aren't doing that. Says,
Right.
and also, and then Nelly comes in and says, and also, you don't realize, because your nutrition IQ is so low, how detrimental to your life eggs are. I'm like, to my life? Like, she's like, it's equivalent to smoking 11 cigarettes, eating one egg. If you want to break down the scientific data, and I'm like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah, we've been so.
I had 5 eggs today.
Dude, she's saying that our entire system of diet is so distorted around the interest and funding associated with the food and agricultural industry. She even said that it's so cheap to be a vegan, but it's so the prices are so inflated right now in the stores because there's so many government subsidies that are going to pay all of this stuff to keep down the price of all these agricultural goods that we're not factoring in, which they're deliberately inflating the price of veganism, so that people are like, this is too expensive, I can't get with this stuff. So you keep consuming, and they keep all of this money pumped into this massive industry that's over pumping you with nutrients you don't need. She's like, protein and got milk. She said, look at me. This is interesting. She said she's been raised her entire life from the beginning as a vegan. She's never had a single animal product in her life. Her mother did this to her, which is interesting to talk about too. But she was like a college athlete. She said she never had any bones broken, and her doctors were like shocked. They were like trying to call CPS on these fools, and her mom is like throwing in all like 100 stack of scientific journals, be like, look, fool, y'all don't know what y'all talking about, which is interesting because it brings me back to this book that I always tell my students to read, by Thomas Kuhn, called The Structure of Scientific Revolution, where he argues how much societal investment, subjective interpretation of reality are towards investing in science to produce results that end up creating these paradigms that he calls them, these ways of looking at things. And there are constantly these anomalies that show up in a paradigm. And the early stages, when there ain't very many of them, we dismiss them. The insane people over here saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be eating meat, or oh, you should be believing in one God, or oh, I'm walking on water, whatever the case may be. And as things go on, more anomalies start showing up until they get so big, and then you have this paradigm shift, where society begins to change, and then it just makes sense when you think of that structure and you start applying a lot of this stuff here that she's talking about.
One question. On top of, because from the very beginning, let's just go ahead and preface with this. On top of this, whatever questions I'm asking or whatever I'm saying, all in jest, let's make it abundantly clear. I could quite possibly have the worst diet known to man. 1, I don't know a thing about veganism. 2, and that if you wanted to get better knowledge of it, then we would implore anybody listening or watching to obviously go check it out for yourself. Don't ever look at my physique and think about I got my act together, because I know for a fact I had a 4 for 4 yesterday. Okay. And not because I thought it was delicious, but because my pocket said it was going to be all right. Now, what I want to ask is this question. I wonder, and I would love to ask Sarah this question. And if you could kind of just, maybe give me an idea of what you would imagine she would have said, or maybe this was already discussed in the 2 instances in which you interacted. If she's going at it from a moral approach, okay, I can
Yes.
imagine another approach would be the health approach, right?
Yeah.
There's a health approach. There's a moral approach. Are there other approaches that those are the only two I can think of. Like, are
Yeah,
there?
man. So
Does
she
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 know,
that's
or I
why
don't know?
that's why I thought she did such a brilliant job. She began with uh her presentation was about 80 minutes long, and she was rushing to get through it because it could have been a lot longer actually. Um but it focuses on the environmental reasons why,
Oh, okay, okay.
the health reasons why,
Yeah,
and the moral reasons why,
three.
right? I feel like she begins with this one as the substructure because underneath it, both of these can arguably be, right? Like one can be this without that, thinking this is too extreme. But as long as you go with the most extreme, then these are going to guarantee to fall under them.
Okay.
Meaning, if you're that because of moral issue, well, then your health and the environment are also going to go with it because you're doing the very thing that helps these also. But some people may just be like, I just care about my health. I don't care about animals. And so maybe they don't include like wearing animal clothes and animal products and things like that.
Right,
Right.
right, right.
So some may be like some of those other two for those reasons, but not embrace this. But nevertheless, she makes the argument that going vegan for these three things, like she asked, if you care about the environment, do you care about racism, do you care about your health, uh
Racism.
racism, it's unbelievable, bro. Like she calls it environmental racism, which is interesting because she asked how many of y'all heard of that term, and none of my students raised their hand, but I'm thinking y'all may not know about that term, but you know about redlining, you know about um these food deserts and food insecurity and all these other things I've been teaching y'all about this semester, which she is calling environmental racism, right? So she
Food.
talks about
What? Food insecurity.
yeah, food insecurity is like where I'm on the board of directors for Southside Community Garden, where we build garden plots in people's homes who live in zip code 76104. The life expectancy for people in that zip code is 62 years. The average life expectancy for people in other zip codes in Texas is 77 years. It's a drastic difference. Why? Because there are no grocery stores. There's no access to fresh, healthy produce. You can go and get a gallon of milk, overpriced by the way, or some chips or some fast food anywhere, but you can't go get a pomegranate. It's hard to find an apple even. And 22% of the people living in that zip code don't have a car. So they live miles away from a grocery store. That would be an example of environmental rate or geographical environmental racism. But the type that she's describing would be this picture she showed of like a pig farm. They had 100 all these pigs over here, and then they had this what she called a shit lagoon, essentially, where the waste from the pigs in that
Oh.
one small area, she
Uh-huh.
said, the waste every year that pig farm produces is equivalent to the waste that a city of 450,000 people produce in a year.
Arlington,
And
Texas.
anywhere, any
Yeah,
city,
we're about
yeah,
400. We're close to 400,000.
yeah, definitely more than Arlington produces. One of those things, two of those things produce what Arlington has. We have, what? Yeah, we got about that actually. So this one pig farm she showed produces more waste than all of us together. And what happens is this lagoon, it starts filling up with all this liquid shit. And then they take these little vats and they go across the fields in low income neighborhoods and they spray it over there acting like it's fertilizer. And the EPA went and did tests on people's indoor walls of their homes in these neighborhoods, like even 5-6 miles away from these lagoons, and they got pig fecal matter on the inside of their homes. That's environmental racism, because they get to do these things in predominantly uh, people of color neighborhoods, who are dealing with the ramifications.
Okay. And not predominantly poor neighborhoods.
Yeah,
Like
certainly.
this isn't happening in poor white neighborhoods.
And yeah, it certainly is, but in vast disproportionately towards people of color. And certainly 76104 represents that, because it's interesting. If you look at 76104, 30 years ago, it was all white, and it had grocery stores and it had all these other types of things. In fact, my mother, who's white, who grew up in that neighborhood, recalls walking barefoot up the street with 5 cents from her mom to pick up a pack of cigarettes for her mother when she was like 12 years old. And she says she never met a black person until she got into sixth grade, when the integration stuff started to slowly begin to occur. Now you fast forward and you look at the neighborhood today, and that same area that was the shopping center where my mom went to pick it up is now just a vacant piece of grass with trash all over it. And the entire neighborhood is 93% people of color. There's no grocery stores. This is
I like my convenience store by my house. I can buy Bitcoin there, water pipes. You can buy. Hey, but you can't buy a pomegranate. That is true. You can't get a pomegranate in that piece, but I can get me pomegranate flavored jelly beans, and I can.
You get all kinds of that kind of stuff. Boy.
All the junk.
Anything you want that can kill you. That's what she says, right? Like, you look at what the world's leading cause of death is today. The world's leading cause of death today.
It can't be in the world. It can't be food insecurity.
Heart disease.
I believe it.
Second one is like diabetes. Where do these diseases come from? What's interesting is, like 100 years ago, you could argue that it was war, it was violence, and all these other things that used to kill us. In fact, Yuri Harari, I think his name is, he wrote that book Homo Deus, where he describes us turning into a new species instead of Homo sapiens, because of how much we've shifted our lives and what's killing us today compared to what was killing us a while back. We've cured hunger, actually. Starvation is not even something where most of the people die from anymore. And it's overconsumption, which is so interesting. And you look at how all this stuff works, man. They make it so accessible to kill yourself. What they say in Boys in the Hood, when Lawrence Fishburne took him to the corner, you know, and he's like, why is it that you see a liquor store on every corner in the hood? Why? They want us to kill ourselves. I mean,
they can't.
You can't get through the government, you know, you can't get in a bottle of whiskey without breaking the government seal. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing.
Well, clarify this for me then. So what? All right. So then, what is food insecurity? Like, I was just calling that I'm hungry or I'm starving. We can't say that no more. Or like,
well, yeah, you can if like you're really starving and you ain't got enough. Food insecurity is the number of people who go to sleep every night without enough food to eat. Now, there could be some subjectivity in there.
That's just not hunger. It's like,
well, if you don't have enough food to eat, that's the problem. If you're losing sleep and time and energy and quality of life because you don't have enough food to put into your body, that's what we would call food insecure. There's like 30-something million U.S. Americans who go to sleep every night food insecure in this country. We waste more food every day in this country than could feed the entire planet.
Yo, like, I'm still eating Thanksgiving leftovers, dog.
Dude, you know, and this is what's interesting, because like all this stuff kind of adds up, dog. Like 2 weeks before she gave that presentation, I'm a part of the sustainability club or sustainability committee on campus, and nobody showed up except me and Lori Ertl to this dude from the EPA. He works for the EPA. He came and gave us a presentation on food waste, which was, man, blew my mind, because it's like, you know, he's talking about like the number one cause of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions into the earth are the beef industry and food waste. Like what happens when you throw a food in a landfill and it gets trapped under all this other stuff? It just releases this methane that keeps coming up. So the number one thing you can do to help reverse climate change is to stop eating red meat or buying red meat or helping the red meat industry. The second thing you can do is eat food before it goes bad. The third thing you can do is feed an animal food that is a little too bad for you to eat. And then the next thing he says is composting. Well, then and also veganism. He didn't go into that, but that her presentation sort of was like, well, veganism hits all of that. Like you ain't got to worry about if this you become a vegan, you're good. Although I pushed back and was like, well, what if not necessarily? What if there's like a steak there that's about to go bad? If I eat it, it's going to go bad anyway if I don't. So ain't I wasting it more? So that's what I told her. Like I don't buy meat for a good while. I rarely do unless I'm with someone else or someone makes it for me, or I'm in this kind of like social setting where somebody's eating meat. I do it, but I never like make it. I never like buy it to prepare or anything. It's been like that for a while.
Yo, that sounds like I used to roll with some homeboys and they were like, man, I don't even smoke no more, dog. I don't smoke no more. I don't buy weed. I don't do none of that. But if it's around, shit. It's like, and then my friends was like, man, you just broke, dog. You don't want to put in on this. You know, good and well that's expensive. But you acting like you're doing it, like you're healthy all of a sudden. You're like, man, you just not that he's broke. What do they call it? You cheat, dog. You cheat. Like, well, I don't buy no steak, but if it's around, get out of here.
She took me to task on that argument, straight up. She took me to task. But especially when it came to like, because I was a vegan
prior
for a minute, vegetarian for a little bit more. But then when I went to Russia, that's when I started having this justification. Well, I'm a cultural historian. I'm a food historian. I got to eat the food of the cultures that I'm participating in. So I'm not going to like avoid that. And she took me to task on that. I'm still the type of person who's going to eat, whatever the social setting. I'm not going to disrupt and be like, hey, y'all shouldn't be doing this type of thing. Let's have a philosophical discussion about veganism before you put that bite in your mouth. I don't
Especially if you didn't bring enough cabbage for everybody. You know what I'm saying? You over here all cabbaged up by yourself. You ain't got enough turnips for all of us. Well, then what you want me to do? Let this steak go to waste?
Right? Oh man.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been interesting to think about, really. Particularly this idea of like big extreme personalities and how some of them, every once in a while there are these people who are very morally above the rest somehow, and they have this striking uncanny moral fortitude about their actions, that I would say we've hinted around at this, and maybe we talk about it more instead of keep dodging it. But it may be a quality that I think one must have in order to be called a revolutionary, in a sense of how I define that term.
Right.
Goes directly against the societal norms, against their own interest, against their own interest of comfort, I should say, because she would argue it is in your interest to be a vegan, but it may be a little bit more difficult to start and particularly maintain if you have a family. One of the things she's got going for her is that she's living in a van by herself. She's 28 years old and she doesn't have a family. I imagine it'd be way harder, particularly for a low-income family of four, which we have. We don't have time to talk about that, I don't think, either now, because we're running close to time. But she did argue to me about, because I was like, what am I supposed to do in 76104? Like, try to convince people to be vegan when they're trying to find stuff to eat at night. And that's when we got into that discussion about the cheapness of it and how it's all propaganda and how they keep us overinflating the prices somehow.
And that brings me back to kind of like where all this started to a degree, because what piqued my interest more than anything was right around the time you said, well, I had this conversation with her. I wasn't supposed to, but it turned out that it was like an hour and two, whatever. And then you said, and then the next day I was at the historical underground meeting, and then I had another conversation, an hour or two, and it brings me back to how by those encounters, it seemed like you met individuals that had something about them that struck you in a way to where you're now, I don't want to say reoriented, but you're at the very least, you're considering things a bit differently. And I think a lot of us encounter either people like that or moments like that where we run across a person or something, and there's something about them that, and you know, you brought up these revolutionary figures that have this moral fortitude, and I would almost argue it's a code. There's something about that individual that has a code that almost seems unshakable. That you're not, that there are these individuals that are sincere in their beliefs, that they follow this code to uphold that belief in the most righteous way possible. And when I say righteous, I don't mean like in the religious sense righteous, but righteous in the sense that when they wake up every day, they are honest. And so I think of individuals like, and if, you know, for me, man, if there was ever an individual that I felt like, gosh, I mean, I'm there's just there's the way they live their life by this code inspires me, would be Malcolm. Like when I looked at Malcolm, at least, and before I got deep into research, I was like, man, that is an upstanding, I live by this code type of dude. Nothing could shake him. The FBI couldn't shake him. Nothing could, you know, only he could shake himself. And so I found that really interesting about those two encounters that you had. Because now that you're considering it, and I want you to do it. I want to see what you. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I got stuff to eat tomorrow, but I'm interested to see how far you get with it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, man. I think it will be. See how it goes. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Sum up real quick, I guess. Yeah, you know, Fred Hampton for me would be like that as well. Certainly, maybe even more so than Malcolm, given the whole controversy behind Marable's, you know, mostly, some would argue, controversial discussions about Malcolm's behavior that may send messages about how he wasn't as disciplined as some would argue, although I would say that wouldn't matter to me whatsoever because it's more of his ideological commitment. Not saying that I even believe a lot of that stuff, but let's assume for the sake of argument it is true. I don't think that changes what you said about Malcolm to be true, in my opinion, because of how raw and deeply committed he was to trying to speak people this truth that emanated from him, that he knew to be true, and would sit there for hours on end until you submit, because he would explain to you why he was right, in the same way that Jesus would have tried to explain to people why he was who he was, or Muhammad, or John Brown, or if we want to get real about it, Jeffrey Dahmer to some degree, right? There's some people where it can be sadistically horrific, but they still have this compulsive drive towards that. Maybe it's a different. It's not on the moral code, but it's on some other way. Like there's some kind of something that makes people have this unwavering attention towards something. We just hope that it's something good other than sinister.
Right.
Because look at how much damage a sinister one can do. But then on the flip side, look how much positive and good a moral one of those directions can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
For just as devastatingly horrendous as that personality with a sinister approach of a Dahmer style can be, you see just as much of this positive of someone who has a one-track mind and some other moral code. So it's a fascinating, really thing when you see people who are committed to this stuff. It's inspiring, certainly, straight up. This was very inspiring. It makes you want to stick to it. We'll see how long we can go. I have a tendency to
I ain't even for like Malcolm. Learning about Malcolm in undergrad, I was like, man, you know what? I'm not gonna cuss anymore. I gave up cussing. I gave up drinking. I gave up eating pork. Did I say I gave up drinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave up drinking. And I tried. I think I lasted like 9 months.
You see, that's interesting too, right there. Like what makes some of those people stay on there and don't. One of the things I think that has to do is a whole nother conversation we don't have time to get into because we'll go off. But is this idea of lived experiences and environment. Like sometimes things happen to you where you can't keep on a direction. And
I think the one of the reasons why I couldn't, and I don't mean to interrupt too much, but like I couldn't go past 9 months is because I didn't have the moral. I didn't have the moral base. I was doing it for like, shits and gigs, and I should have. If I was more morally inclined, I probably would have been more committed.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good comment. Well, I think what do we got? We're coming up on our hour, or we passed it?
We did it.
We did it. I got a decent quote. Maybe you can see what you think about it, or offer another one if you want. It's by Rosa Luxemburg on our list here. It says, "Those who do not move do not notice their chains." Kind of like that idea if we apply to this personality that we're talking about here as the movers. Who notice these chains all around them, that many of us, you could argue, who don't pay attention to them are just standing still. You know what I mean?
The chains is CHAINS.
Yes.
Those that do not move
do not notice their chains.
Oh, fair enough. Wow, that's tough. That's tough. Yeah. I don't even know. I don't even know, man.
I guess we ended at that.
Then we just leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
All right, man. I'll let it go.
Brother.
All right.
Take it easy.
I'll holler at you.
Until next time.
Sure.